Statewide surveys have long reflected a high degree of public distrust in the government's ability to be effective, responsive, and efficient. And reports of program misfires, like the technical blunders surrounding the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, only add to the public's cynicism. But government underperformance is more than just annoying. It undermines public confidence that government can solve problems we face as a nation, state, or region. Recently, the state's nonpartisan Little Hoover Commission issued a report that provides a blueprint on how government can become more customer-friendly and help rebuild public confidence and trust in the ability of government institutions to serve its citizens. Our guest is Carole, the Executive Director of California's Little Hoover Commission. Improving the government experience. Mission possible?
Additional funding for the Maddy report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world, and by Kaiser Permanente. Thrive. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. How can we improve the public's trust and confidence in government? Our guest is Carole, the Executive Director of the Little Hoover Commission, who thinks the answer is for the government to become more customer-focused. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So one of the motivations for your study was the need to address the trust deficit that Californians have with their government. Just how bad is the trust deficit?
Well, for quite some time, Californians have had little trust in government to do the right thing. In fact, that's backed up by public policy surveys that showed 2/3 of Californians said that state government can't be trusted to do what is right only some of the time or never. And it's been consistent over more than a decade.
Yeah, it's actually the PPIC, which you're probably citing, the Public Policy Institute of California, has done studies, and I read since 2002, and probably was in your report, that statewide surveys reflect that 60% have a high distrust of state government effectiveness, responsiveness, and efficiency. That's a problem. It doesn't help probably that there's lots of articles in the press when bad things happen, so it just kind of reinforces that narrative. You know, you state in your report that, quote, by improving each Californian's cumulative experiences interacting with government, the state can rebuild public confidence in government's ability to perform and ultimately encourage greater trust in its institutions. But I'm wondering, aren't people's view of government kind of influenced by their general attitude about, politics rather than their specific interaction with DMV?
See, I think differently. I think whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, whether you're in the middle, everybody wants government to work. You want your interaction to government to be similar to what you experience when you shop online or when your doctor sends you a text message and says you have an appointment the next day. And so I think across all government, people just want government to work like the rest of their lives.
Well, make the specific case for government reform. Why specifically government reform? I mean, businesses always want to treat their customers well, and we can assume that the government providing a service is like a business providing a service. But why specifically government reform?
Well, I think it's to build that trust in government that we just talked about. If you are going to be asking people to raise taxes or even continuing the taxes they already pay, people want to know that you're doing something efficiently with that money. And when their own experience is inefficiency, then they don't trust that the people that they've elected will do with their money the way that they should. So I think it's important. I also think that the public servants, people choose to serve the public. Those who are on the front line are as frustrated sometimes as the Californian that they're interacting with. They want it to work as well.
Yeah, but let me ask you this. So government usually is a monopoly. And when they provide a service, police, fire, what have you, private sector is not providing it. They don't have any competition typically. There's no profit motive to spur innovation. So what's the motivation to improve the customer experience?
Well, again, it goes back to trust and trust in government. But I also think that there are efficiencies to be made. So as we're frustrating the Californian who is trying to open up a business and has to go to a whole bunch of different websites and gets all confused, they're feeling like, why is it so hard? Why, if I'm in a different state, why is it easy? Why does it have to be so much harder in California? And by improving it, you then improve the experience that that person had with their government, and they have greater faith and trust in government.
Yeah, it's the states are supposed to be the laboratories where you can find good ideas, and so to the extent that California may be a little short on the customer experience, they could look to other states that have been more successful, maybe replicate or improve on those models, I suppose. Do you have some examples of opportunities to improve the customer experience? I assume you have a few.
Yes.
So let's talk about them for a couple of minutes. What are some of the opportunities out there to improve the customer experience?
Okay, there are plenty. So let's take our state parks. This was one area we looked at. We tried to look at areas where the access that the public used a lot. So services that the state provides directly that many millions of people access. So state parks, for example, you want to visit a state park. Wouldn't it be great to go online and look up how much is it going to cost when I get there and be able to either pay with your credit card and print something out and stick it in your dashboard, or even better, have something on your phone, an app.
Right.
To the experience today, you drive, you can't figure out how much it's going to cost. You get there, you need exact change, you have to shove it in this little envelope and stick it in a little box. Another example, you've been injured, you're in the hospital, you need to access state disability insurance. So you give the Employment Development Department a call. Well, you might be on hold for an hour while you're sitting there in your hospital bed. That's not customer service. I mean, there are plenty of examples. Again, going back to opening up a business. In other states, you can do it online in one portal. With ours, we've improved it, but you still have to go website to website. What if you had one application that you filled out and then it populated all the different forms? So you as the potential business owner didn't have to figure it out and retype and retype. And
a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
Yeah, would that be interesting? Well, this isn't the first attempt to improve or reinvent government. Why did past attempts fail, or did they? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. A citizen's experience with their government usually compares poorly with their experiences as a customer in other venues, particularly lagging far behind in customer satisfaction. Our guest is Carole with the Hoover Commission, who wants to change that. First, let's define who are the customers of state government.
Customers are Californians. Now, they're captured customers because you don't get to choose who am I going to use to get my driver's license, but nevertheless, it's people who are filing their taxes, it's people who are going to a state park, it's people who need to access a vital record, any Californian who needs to interact with government to get something done.
It's not, actually, it's even more than that. It actually is people who want to visit the state, right? And
True.
utilize our parks like we were talking about. So, yeah, the customer, when you think about customer, it's not just even state residents, it's people from other states, it's overseas, et cetera. And by the way, we know we have a lot of people who vacation in California. So those tourism dollars, that's kind of important, I would think. You know, this is not the first attempt, we talked earlier about this, to reinvent government in the United States. It was a major initiative of the Clinton administration in the 1990s. What were some of their goals?
So we heard from some of the folks that were involved in that reinventing government back in the Clinton administration. And interesting, the goals really haven't changed. Their goals were put customers first, put the people of the United States first. It was cut through the red tape. It was empower public servants to be able to do what they needed to get done. It was creating space for experimentation, for trying new things. So these are all very current, just as they were implemented or attempted to be implemented. They're still true.
You know, they tried it at the federal level, but they also tried it, you know, at California with Governor Schwarzenegger. What's the past experience with reinventing government at the state level?
So Governor Schwarzenegger made he made a lot of comments that caught the media's attention, but one was, I'm not going to move boxes around, I'm going to blow up the boxes.
I remember that.
This was all called the California Performance Review, and they brought in 300 state employees from all different backgrounds, and they sat down for months, if not almost a year, and they came out with 1,200 recommendations on ways to fix government. The next step was to implement that, and unfortunately a lot of things got in the way at that time. There was some bungling at the very highest levels, and then along came the recession, and while those ideas were good, they kind of took a back seat and got put on the shelf. So
people are just trying to survive at that point, right? So they're not thinking about improvements, we're thinking just survive.
Yeah, we were state workers were furloughed, people were laid off, and so you were doing more with less. So it was hard to think, okay, what else can we do to improve government?
Right. So we're recovering now from the Great Recession. We've also got to, by the way, have more digital tools at our disposal than we did, 10 years ago, obviously. So we appear to be entering a new era of government reforms. But there's still some common obstacles that exist out there. What are some of the common obstacles that still exist? So
you're right. We have better tools than we've ever had. But government change is hard. It's just government moves slow. It's hard to embrace new technologies. The processes are slow. They're not designed to embrace new things. We also, in government, have a way of not understanding what the customer needs are. We're siloed. We're compliance, we're budgets. We're not really thinking about what is the customer experience. So it's a whole new way of thinking for government.
One of the things I noticed in your report, you talk about this thing called individual touch points rather than the journey. Can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so it's every time a person comes into contact with government and looking at that. So in France, for example, When a baby is born, that's a touch point. The baby gets a birth certificate. Then that baby will move through life and will enter school, and that's another touch point. So there are different phases in life, and it's having government look at it and anticipate what are the needs going to be.
And you're also, I think you're talking in your report of saying even when you're doing, I don't know, let's say going to DMV and getting your license, not just the initial experience at the counter, but following them through that entire journey until the license is in their hand. Did they have a good experience the entire way? And that is what businesses do. So kind of bringing some of that into the public sector. You know, you were talking a little bit about other countries around the world. I want to touch on that for a moment. What are some of the customer-centric solutions that you heard about that are occurring in other governments around the world?
Sure. So one place where they've done a tremendous amount is the United Kingdom. And one of the things that they've done is listen to their users. So they were going to redesign their web portal. And their web portal is the gateway to all things you want to get done in the United Kingdom. Well, they put up an alpha version. They solicited feedback. They made over 100 changes in 10 days. So it was doing
kind of like
something.
a pilot project.
Yeah, but listening to the people who were going to use it and adapting based on what they said. So it's doing something digital, but it's also being very in tune with the people who are going to use your service. You have Australia and New Zealand, you have a single sign-on and a single password. So instead
just
of
one password, isn't that? As opposed to I've got to think about 20 of them.
Right. So in state government, you know, maybe you have one password for the DMV, and then you have another one for when you file your taxes, and still another one if you're a business. And you know, they allow you to do everything.
And are they safe? They're using the one password? Is that generally safe?
Generally speaking, we didn't hear anything about it being unsafe, but we didn't delve into that to any great detail either.
I think probably they've done enough things, redundancies in their system to make sure that they are safe. Well, thanks for explaining kind of some of the past attempts, successful, some not, in reinventing government. So is technology the answer for more efficient and effective government? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. So how do you go about building a government worthy of California's brand of innovation? We're talking to Carole with the state's Little Hoover Commission. It would seem a key to closing some of this performance gap is to harness technology to meet customer expectations. How is technology currently being used in other governments outside California? You mentioned United Kingdom earlier, for example.
They have embraced technology. They really, in the past 5 or 6 years, have really made an effort. So I described their portal, which is the gateway to everything you want to get done in government. They've also made it very easy, as I've mentioned earlier. Other states in the United States have done this as well, but easy to open up a business. They're getting rid of the paper transactions and moving towards digital transactions. People don't want to go into offices. They want to do things at their own pace in the middle of the night if they want to.
Right. It's interesting though that the problem though is government generally doesn't have a good reputation when it comes to technology. I mean, we think about the rollout of the Affordable Care Act and all the problems I had with the website there. And the state has had its own, California specifically, has had its own reputation for technology blunders. So won't this be difficult to pull off?
Yes, it would be difficult. And we do have these multi-million, gazillion-dollar failures in our past. We have lots of them in California, but that's why we can't keep doing the same thing over and over. So the way others are starting to approach technology is to start small. Don't try to do everything at once. Don't do everything in one giant RFP that 7 years from now will get finished with technology that's already out of date. It's start, fail, revise, repeat.
And incrementally.
You're
incrementally trying to improve things as opposed to you're going to eat the whole enchilada and everything at the same time. Just kind of start, they say like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? You don't try to do the whole thing at once. But you're talking more than simply digitizing the current processes. You're really talking about new design principles, aren't you?
Absolutely. So you don't want to take a clunky process and just put it online. And so I have a very good example. The Commission is currently looking at our state's Denti-Cal program. The way a dentist becomes part of it for a provider, they fill out a 22-page form, hand fill out the form, mail it in. And the form was adapted.
And then they retire.
The form was adapted from a form that is used for Medi-Cal and doctors. So they've adapted the form. You have to remember wherever it has something related to what a doctor would do, say not applicable. Well, you don't want to just stick that form online. You want to fix the form. You want it online, but you don't want the same clunky old form.
Right, just can't do a cut and paste. You got to actually think about how you can make it better.
Yeah, how did we get here? How can we design things that make sense? Not because we've always had it and we've always had these these words on this form. Rethinking.
You know, you also go into some detail in your report about this technological, you call it insurgency, which I thought was an interesting word, taking place at the federal level to revamp the federal government. And there are groups there with names like the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, or 18F, or the U.S. Digital Service. What are these groups doing?
Okay, well, you brought up healthcare.gov, so I'll start with the U.S. Digital Services. So when that wasn't working, the President Obama called on Silicon Valley, and they got people to come out, and it's like, we have to fix this, and we have to fix this now, and they did.
And they did. They fixed it pretty quickly.
Right, and so they said, this is good. They're now part of the General Services Administration, and their role is to prevent things like that from ever happening again. Now, some of the other insurgency is the Innovation Fellows and 18F. So the Innovation Fellows were an idea that the president had. We'll bring people in with technologists, designers, for a tour of duty.
Yeah, I like that. Almost like military, a tour of duty.
You're not going to stay in government for 30 years.
Which also probably has an influence, because they can then maybe step on a few toes and do some things that if you're a career employee, it might be a little more difficult.
Right, but they are partnering, because you want the knowledge to stay behind. But they come in, they have new thinking, and so 18F, that's actually, it's at the corner.
Sounds like a spy agency or something.
It's the corner of 18th and F Streets.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it came from. And they started as a small group, and they're kind of like the federal government geek squad. They're more being hired by departments who say, I have this problem, can you help me think at it, design it differently, make it better. So they're kind of going around and doing things like that.
It's amazing, though, California, with all our innovation and technology, you think that it would all be starting here, but we're playing a little catch-up, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's sad that the people who are being recruited to go fix the federal
government From Silicon Valley to
here.
go fix the federal government, and they're in the state already. What about Utah? You cite them as an example. What happened there?
So we had Utah come to one of our public hearings, a Utah representative, and they had governors, and I say governors because it wasn't just one, it was multiple governors who really embraced technology early. So they were ahead of the game. They also have something that's a bit different. It's a public-private partnership where they have a firm that has developed more than 600 interactive applications. And the way the firm makes money is by they get a certain percentage of certain applications that are used. That's what funds them. So they're motivated to design things that people want and need.
And everybody uses apps these days, it sounds like. When I ask you one last question in this segment, that is, you know, there are some successes where the state has used some technology. Let's end on a positive note here. What are some of the successes?
I would say they're made fun of, but the DMV has come a long way. You can do a lot online where you used to have to go to the office. Franchise Tax Board, it's the second largest tax agency in the United States.
The IRS for California.
Yeah, and you can do almost everything. If you have a simple tax, you can do it all online for free. They now have live chat, so they can help you. If you call them, you get. If you're going to be put on hold, they'll call you back. You know, just those sorts of things that make the experience better.
You know, I can actually tell you that my last experience with DMV actually was quite good. So there you go. So it is actually working. So thanks for explaining how technology might help government become more customer friendly. Up next, what are some of the specific recommendations to make this happen? Next on the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking to Carole with the state's Little Hoover Commission about what government can do to become more customer friendly. You know, one of your recommendations is to, quote, designate and empower customer champions, unquote. And part of that means designating a state chief customer officer to drive the state's customer-centric strategy. Can you explain the who, what, where, when, why, and how of that?
Sure. So it's one thing for us to say we should be more customer-centric, but somebody needs to be accountable for that. So we thought that the Secretary of the Government Operations Agency, when Governor Brown created it a couple years ago, he said that they were going to move from control to customer service. So we thought they're ideally situated. They've got human resources, they've got technology, but it shouldn't just be there. It has to be empowered. You can't just say, okay, you're already doing a bunch of things. Here's one more thing for you to do. So you have to make it a priority, and it has to be embedded in all the different agencies and departments. It has to be every time somebody's going to do a new technology project, asking, have you thought about the customer experience? So it's injecting it at every level.
Yeah, you know, another recommendation you have is you're advocating for the creation of a skilled in-house digital services team to help departments deliver services that work for Californians. Are you saying that each department in the state, each agency in the state needs such a team?
No, actually, this was building on that federal entity we just talked about, 18F. So we'd like to have a California version of 18F that would be tapped
11th
by...
and J.
Yes, exactly. And they would go to different departments and agencies and help solve problems. And it would bring in some new thinking. Hopefully we could lure the people who are going to Washington to, hey, you can stay in California, come here and fix state government, do a tour of duty here.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. What about the state? Do you think the state will need to hire new employees to get this job done?
I think to have the digital team that we envision, we do need some outside thinking. We do want to inject the design elements, the user-centric, the user technologists as they're called, to help jumpstart it. But ultimately, the knowledge will be transferred. And I think there's a role for additional training on this for existing state employees. But I do think a small team injected into the state would be helpful.
Okay, you know, your final recommendation is to, quote, cultivate a customer-centric culture across California state government, unquote. And you make a series of recommendations, we'll talk about those in a minute, but you're trying to offer a blueprint for agency departments to immediately and relentlessly, interesting word, pursue a customer-centric orientation. Sounds a lot like what a lot of businesses would write, frankly. So what are the key aspects of your blueprint?
So we have about a dozen strategies that we outline, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically it comes back to the user experience. So rewarding a customer service culture. Right now, as we said at the beginning, there isn't any emphasis to change and be customer-centric. It's taking the public servants' ideas, because they're on the front lines, as I said. They know what's wrong, and giving them the flexibility and the environment to fix things. It's asking customers, how are we doing? What did we do this time? Could we do it better?
And you talk about, in that specific instance, you talk about continuous improvement.
Yes.
And so continuous improvement to you means what?
It means
I know it sounds obvious, it sounds self-defining, but how do you view it?
I view it that you're constantly, you know, you don't just ask once, okay, we created a new website. That's not necessarily the answer. Sometimes apps aren't the answer. Do I really want an app for the DMV that I only go to once a year? Sometimes it's just creating a different experience. And as technology evolves and as we adapt as a state and as a world, things are going to change. So you constantly have to be asking, is this still working?
Can't rest on your laurels.
Yes.
So another thing you talk about is providing political cover for experimentation to overcome a risk-averse culture. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So we have a long culture of doing IT, for example, where we have the large RFP and we have these large companies that come in. It's very hard. We met a lot of civic technologists in the course of this study who'd like to come in and help, but they don't even know what door to go through. They don't want to respond to a 100-page RFP. And so changing things is going to step on some toes, and it's going to make some people unhappy. And so to have, whether it's a political appointee or somebody who's just in for a short stint and doesn't have to worry that, you know, oh, these people over here aren't going to like it, to be able to hit quickly and make changes.
You know, you also talk about the promise of government data, which is very interesting. What do you see as, how is government data going to be useful and helpful in terms of improving the customer experience?
Okay, so one person who's doing quite a bit on this is Mike Wilkening. He works for Health and Human Services. They've taken the bold approach of making some of their data open. And by doing that, by putting it out there, it's enabled development of some various apps. So somebody took the data and was able to put in an app where you can find places that will accept women, infant, children program. The state parks, for example, there are people who've taken some of their information and created apps. So if you're somebody who wants to always camp by water, whether it's a beach or a lake,
just
this
check
site
the box.
is for you. Yes.
Oh, there you go. Well, I want to thank Carole D'Alia with the Little Hoover Commission for joining us. If you want to stay up on current and stay current on state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute on Facebook, Twitter, or log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.